kickoff question for the panel. SMARA has been the law for the past 35 years. How effective has it been in meeting its goals? Has it been properly enforced? I think we've gotten some good clues to those answers, but does anybody want to take that, or?
Well, from my perspective, SMARA doesn't exist. We see nothing. We see miles and miles and miles of abandoned mine lands with little or no mitigation, and we see terribly, terribly tiny financial assurances, and we see rec plans that are boilerplate and often don't reflect the site conditions. So
Pat,
that's
do you
my
want to take
low
this
perspective.
Thank you, Gary.
Sure, and let me try to respond by, first of all, just acknowledging the two primary balancing goals of the Surface Mining and Reclamation Act, and that is certainly the conservation as well as the development of these critical resources in the state, and that is a delicate balancing act to achieve. And from my review of the past, obviously I've only been here 6 months in this position, but thanks to my staff and the great documents that have been put together by my predecessors, Mr. Pompey and others, from what I've witnessed since the Surface Mining and Reclamation Act has come into play in 1975, that first of all, Bill and the legislature have recognized that this act has needed adjustments over the year, and if you look at some of the major changes, about every 10 to 15 years there's been major revisions to the Surface Mining and Reclamation Act, and certainly if you look back at 1990, you know, with the adding financial assurances, the inspection reports and reclamation plans, that was a signal that the original act was deficient and needed to be improved. And then there were additional changes that came along later on, and certainly the legislature's recognition today, as Mr. Craven has shared with you, there are still a number of activities with respect to the quality of inspections that are being conducted, the thoroughness and the details that are provided in the reclamation plans with regards to slope stability and the revegetation and other requirements that aren't being consistently applied throughout the state. And that's why we're working together as a team with the Sierra Fund and many other critical stakeholders to explore how we can address some of these fixes through the legislature. So I'm very excited. I think Bill did an outstanding job of just describing you know, what some of those real challenges are. Gary has provided the local perspective. Those of you that feel the tremendous impacts of these mining operations. So having everybody at the table developing solutions, I think we're in a very strong position right now in this session to bring about desired change.
I don't have anything to add. I kind of addressed that in my remarks.
All right. So the next question's a bit specific, but Pat, you thought you might take this first. Should current mining plans be prepared and stamped by professional engineers?
I fully support what Mr. Craven just mentioned a few minutes ago, and in particular the surveying, geology, engineering, I think that merits professional licenses to underscore the importance, and that you have seasoned professionals that are reviewing this work, because it is so important with respect to grading plans and slope stability, as well as some of the hydrologic studies and stream analysis that you have to do, and the impacts of the mining industry, that we are very supportive of getting that stamp of assurance and guarantee that you have licensed professionals conducting this very important work.
Mm-hmm. Well, not just those issues, but also downstream, I guess hydrologic sort of covers that, but downstream water quality depends on a good reclamation plan, and actually the implementation of a good reclamation plan. And you know, we've got horror stories about the failure of past such plans. So I think it's time that we up the ante on the quality of the reclamation plans in this state, and that we put some professional licenses on these papers to establish that they are top rate.
There's another level of professional accreditation that, as a general public, I'd love to see, and I touched on that, and that's the notion of a more complete economic assessment, a broader understanding of the economic costs of projects to the state at large, public health, education, etc.
Thank you, panel. My next question has to do with, as someone loves to swim in the river and representing a river organization, we talk a lot about surface mining, but what about suction dredge mining? Should it be regulated like other mining?
You want me to go first?
Sure, you can go first.
Sure, Bill.
Well, the key words there are like other mining. I don't know if a suction dredger needs to go get a financial assurance or a reclamation plan, but a suction dredger needs to have permits from the Water Board and Fish and Wildlife, among others, and probably the Native American Heritage Commission, to make sure that his or her, I guess mostly his, activities don't take any fish or other species, that mercury is not methylized, that other water quality objectives are not violated, and that no cultural artifacts are disturbed. I think if they do that, which may be an impossible hurdle, then they may not need a reclamation plan.
Maybe I can just augment what Bill has said from my perspective. It is regulated, because the Fish and Wildlife has authority on suction mining, and not only that, but if indeed they were to conduct those operations, and I should say right now there is a moratorium on suction dredging in California, that if they met that threshold of either removing 1,000 cubic feet of material or disturbed, an acre of area that would be equivalent to the land next to the river, that would trigger SMARA review and enforcement. So I believe under my interpretation of the Surface Mining and Reclamation Act that it is already covered. Good. So it's just a question of whether or not you have the monitoring in place to determine that over 1,000 cubic feet are being extracted or have disturbed, roughly an acre of river area. Yeah. So,
Gary, you want to weigh in on this one?
Well, the problem is determining. I believe it's cubic yards.
Yeah.
The problem is determining what is 1,000 cubic yards, and often a county inspector will be called out to a small thing that started as a suction dredge mine, and the miner got a little enthusiastic crawling up the creekside banks and found that if you just move this one rock, you could get a whole bunch more dirt, and all of a sudden you have this enormous hole where there was no previously existing baseline.
Right. Yeah.
So nobody knows.
Right.
And that's a case of more data, as from last night, and from having a baseline established. The technology to do that is getting cheaper and cheaper. The county has started using LiDAR in such a way that you're getting very, very detailed maps. That equipment is not prohibitively expensive, and it's not impossible to operate. So again, by educating your local decision makers at the county level and providing them with the ability to do this preliminary measurement, this baseline measurement, you have much better understanding between the miner and the local agency on where you're actually going.
One more quick follow-up on this. Some of you probably know that there's legislation pending on this topic because the mining industry, the dredging industry, has challenged the application of the Fish and Game Code, including the moratorium, to claims on federal lands, and a couple of courts have indicated that the moratorium may be preempted by federal law, the 1872 Mining Act. Existing California law does not give the regional water boards a regulatory role. The regulatory role is limited to the Department of Fish and Wildlife. So the legislation which is moving this year would extend a role to the state board, and then for the regional boards for permitting, in addition to the permitting that would be in the Fish and Game Code. So it's kind of a long answer to the current state of affairs on suction dredge mining.
Yeah. And maybe just adding a little bit to that, and Gary hit the issue right on the head with, how do you measure that extraction or whatever. It is so critical. And I don't know if there's anybody from Fish and Wildlife in this room. Is there anybody from Fish and Wildlife here? Because I know that Fish and Wildlife is actually developing the regulations right now during this moratorium, and I hope that that's one of the key things that they address on the tools and how you measure the extraction quantities that trigger, for example, the application of the Surface Mining and Reclamation Act. So.
Yeah, no, thank you. All right, and let's go to the last question. What should we, this is interesting one to me. What do we do with mines that have completed reclamation, they've had their financial assurances returned, but they still have chemical or physical hazards on site, or haven't been reclaimed to a beneficial public end use? They're not ready for us to build a dollar store or something that we like to do.
You want to go, Pat? You want to do first on that?
Oh, let's see. It's kind of a tough question. You have a reclamation plan that's in place, but it was not, the provisions of it were not fully carried out. You've got some physical, chemical challenges. That's where other state agencies, for example, Department of Toxic Substances Control Board and probably the Water Board, are going to have to weigh in, because you do not, just because you haven't, you've met the SMARA requirements, there's other state laws that would kick in and obligations that you still have to meet. Those, if there's toxics on the site, you're going to have to fulfill those obligations and responsibilities down the road. With respect to some of the other issues on the physical front, obviously it's going to require posting of signs to keep people out of there from those physical hazards, and partnering with others such as U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, which Office of Mine Reclamation has done a very successful job in our abandoned mines unit to secure and attract funding to California to make these sites safe.
Bill?
I think Pat's right. There are other laws that would kick in, but I think the important point is that circumstance, I think, indicates a failure of the SMARA process. I mean, there really shouldn't be a site where the rec plan has been, somebody says the rec plan has been fully implemented, the financial assurances have been released, and you still have a problem. I think that's an indication that the mining law itself was not completely or not satisfactorily implemented. And I think the solution is what we're trying to work on now, which is let's make sure that the inspections are done every year so that we can identify some of these problems in advance. Let's make sure that the financial assurances are updated every year if that's necessary to pay for the full reclamation of the site, assuming if the operator were to walk away, which is what the standard is. And let's make sure that the rec plan is updated as necessary so that the department and the public fully understand what's going to happen when this mine closes. And that way you won't have this terrible circumstance of an inadequate implementation of the law.
There's some parallels to this. For example, in the oil shipping industry, anybody who ships oil is required to pay a certain amount of money into an escrow account that funds cleanup operations. It's a condition of your license. So what we're really talking about here is abandoned risk, or the abandonment and then the subsequent lodging of risk. Where does that risk live? Currently, that risk is foisted back onto the lead agency, which are the counties. Well, they're clearly the most incapable of handling this because they do not have the financial wherewithal to try to locally fund state requirements. As we've learned in this conference, that mining debris crosses county borders and is a central factor in the overall hydrologic health of California as well as public health. So I hate to say this, but we need another state agency. Okay, as unpopular as that sounds, we can't continue on the way we are. We have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of piles of rocks that are pooping on our water situation. And the state does need to address that because it is more than just a county issue. It's a statewide issue, and it affects our futures. We understand that water really is the linchpin of everything in California. No business functions without water. Everybody needs to be scatologically inclined and flush the toilet. So that risk needs to be understood at a deeper fiscal impact. The public health impact, for example, is not very clearly understood. That has a statewide cost that is manifest in public health expenditures to handle health issues caused by mining debris. The picture of risk needs to be broadened in such a way that the state can make the argument to the taxpayer that it's cheaper in the long run to go and fix these things with public monies right now than to suffer the degradation of our water system and public health through the long-term continual sloughing of mercury and silt and gravels and lost environmental and lost economic opportunity. How we get there is we need to change the story. That we need to change the narrative of what our public good is and what we're all willing to pay for it. You know, we all stop at stop signs, most of us. We all drive on the right-hand side of the road. We recognize public goods as a society. To recognize the health of our watershed from very tippy-top to all the way out to the Farallones, to recognize that as a continuous system that is a tremendous state asset, if not the state asset, would go a long way in making these funds reasonably apportionable.
All right, Gary, thank you. You get the last word. Quick announcements, and then we'll take a break. All right, we're about to take a 15-minute break. There's a coffee station in ballroom 3 on the other wall. The late afternoon session is going to start at 2:40. The last breakout session, if you're sticking with us here, mine reclamation is not in this room. It's going to be in the Hind Auditorium on the first floor. If you have to leave now, we hope you don't, but turn in your pink evaluation sheet and your name badge at the registration table, and please join me in thanking our panelists, Pat Perez, Bill Craven, and Gary Parsons.